Moving on to reporting. I mentioned before creating lists. This is one of the best things you can do. It's good for you in terms of being able to build your followers, because once you follow people, sometimes they will follow you back, but it's also really, really good for you in terms of your reporting capacity. So think of any social media platform as a potential source of contacts. And again, following the right people is not just crucial to establishing yourself, it's crucial when it comes to using social media as a journalist. So one of the things you can do is check to see if the news organizations you might follow have already created lists. And if they have, you can just follow the whole list, as you see on the left under the membership. You can follow all of them, but my guess is 161 people is probably a lot to follow. So you can actually click and take a look at those members and say, oh, that person covers exactly what I'm interested in. I'm going to follow them, right? And you can see some of these little bios will tell you more about them. Do they report in a different language than English? Are they currently presenters? Are they, what do they cover, and so on. So what you do is you're going to look at the news organization and then see if they have lists. Click on that and you can see what their lists are, and then you can decide if you want to follow those people. Okay. There is a way to search for lists on Google. On Facebook, just as you would search for lists, you're going to search for groups that could be useful to you. So I don't know why they thought I would be interested in the marriage club, but this came up for me. But you can browse them. You can see, oh, I want to see about parenting or civics and community. Maybe that's something that would be of interest. So you can take a look through. So you search, you click first groups, and then search, or so you can type into the group like South Africa or South African politics or whatever. And then you can also click discover, and this is what you get, what Facebook thinks you'd be interested in. Now, if you're new on Facebook, they have no idea who you are. They don't really know much about you, so they're not going to be very helpful. Same for Twitter. If you're new on Twitter, you always get this, people to follow suggestions. Like, well, why exactly do you think I should follow them? It's usually just because they have a lot of followers. So, but once you establish what you're following and what you're tweeting about, then they'll start to be more relevant. And the same usually goes for Facebook. Although again, marriage club? I don't think so. Anyway, when you have officials or NGOs or candidates, find out if they have WhatsApp groups. They often do, and make sure you're there. Because this gets to the question we were asked earlier about how does a community radio person establish themselves when the big news organizations have much more influence. Well, you establish yourself by getting in the same group, right? Because at that point, you're on the same footing as journalists from big news outlets. You want to behave ethically, don't waste people's time, or you could be removed, because these lists do have limits. But if you're there, you're there. And there is no distinction between you and someone from a much bigger news organization, except unless people know the difference in terms of their names. But otherwise, you have just the same standing. Building a one-to-one relationship with a source on WhatsApp takes a lot of effort. But frankly, it's somewhat less than trying to do it in person, especially with COVID and everything else. So the plus side is that it is way more immediate. Again, the blue check marks at the bottom of a WhatsApp message means somebody actually read it, which is huge, right? When you can nag, or when you might want to nag, and maybe when you shouldn't, that they've read it, but they haven't gotten back to you. I find that enormously helpful. If they haven't read it, maybe you actually, the old fashioned thing we used to do, we used to pick up the telephone and we place a call. But it's also great because you can get much more than text, right? You can get photos, you can get video, audio, all of that. Very useful for those of us in radio, because you can ask people to just please record something and send it to you, and then you're ready to go. You actually have something usable. But don't rely on this exclusively, not any of this. Unless everybody's locked down and you absolutely can't go anywhere, meeting in person, getting to know people, it still matters for building trust. And once that trust is built, then you can take it onto a platform where you can be in touch remotely. Obviously, the first, last, most important thing on any social media site is to verify, verify, verify. Don't take anything that you see as true. Don't share anything you haven't read. Really important. I'm amazed at how many times even professionals wind up sharing something that they just didn't have time to read, and it looked like it came from a reputable source, so it must be true. And then you find out you've been had, that maybe it was a fake account, or maybe the original tweeter or Facebook poster just made a mistake, and all you've done is to amplify it. So verification is really important, and privacy is also important. So WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, backs up to the cloud if it's enabled. I think we had a fairly famous lawsuit case in the United States where a man was found to have violated the law because, unbeknownst to him, because he didn't check his settings, his WhatsApp chats were backed up in the cloud, and the law enforcement group got access to his iCloud backup, and whoop, there it was, encrypted, yes, but certainly available. And governments can also get access through court orders, which is something to remember. So be careful when you're sharing. Recognize that these things can be and may be made public, even though they're encrypted, which is why so many people are now using different methods. So Mark, investigative journalist for ABC, the Australian broadcasting company, is using Signal. And so is Liz Brazil, who's a local journalist in the United States. She's using Signal and says, just DM me and I'll give you my Signal number. So Signal is end-to-end encrypted, and it seems, at least according to many journalists I know, to give them more security, more sense of privacy than they have felt with WhatsApp. Mark Willesee is also using Proton Mail, which is an encrypted mail service. I don't know if any of you are in a position where you're doing the kind of investigations that he is, but he really, really wants to be sure that his communications are secure and private. Signal is less widely used so far. On Signal, you can set messages to disappear after a set period of time. They collect almost no information on their users, and group chats can go up to 1,000 people, which is huge. Another option, of course, is Telegram, which I'm sure you know about. And it's by default not encrypted. You have to ask for it to be encrypted. You have to do that in your settings. So that said, be sure wherever you go, however you get information, whoever your sources are, make sure you can use it before you do use it. Double check. There have been occasions where, because of the intimacy of something like WhatsApp, where it just feels like you're chatting with a friend, sources may start to think of you as a friend, and you're not, you're a journalist. So they may consider, for example, everything that they're chatting with you on WhatsApp about to be off the record. No problem, I can say this because they won't use it. You need to draw professional lines, probably repeatedly, to remind people who are your sources that they are in fact your sources and not your buddies. And to do this regularly so that when something good comes across, you're sure, you've confirmed, you reconfirm that you can use it, right? And under what circumstances can you use it? Can you quote them directly? Can you mention that you have a source that says this, but you can't give their name because you're protecting their privacy? Whatever. Just be sure that you know the rules before you use anything. Now, we talked about lists, right? And we also need to know how to search. So using advanced search on Twitter is very, very useful. It's only on the desktop version, not on mobile, but it's worth trying if you have not yet. You see the three dots there at the top. When you go to Twitter, you can type in the search box, and then at the bottom of your search, it will say advanced search. So you'll see over here, search filters. I can say, I only want people I follow. I only want locations to be near me, which means you have to have your location enabled. But you can also just be a broad search. And then at the bottom, you can say, oh, advanced search. And here's where it gets really interesting. So you can put in the particular words you're looking for, particular words you don't want, and I've had this happen more than once, where there's a topic in the news, but it's also like related to the name of a popular song or something. So, you put, I don't want song, or I don't want the singer's name. You can throw in hashtags. You can search in languages, specific languages. So by default, it's any language, but you can maybe narrow it down. You can say whose tweets you're looking for. You can say what period of time you want to find a tweet in. This is really helpful, particularly if you're going backwards in time to find something that someone has said about something that you didn't save, but they said it, and they've just contradicted it in public, right? There's a common line in the US on Twitter: there's always a tweet, which, as soon as someone has, said something absolutely, positively, concretely, forever and ever, you go back and find that they've said quite the opposite 2 years ago. And this is how you do it. You find it by searching and by doing this kind of search. Now, Twitter, will save up to 25 searches in the search boxes. So if it's something that you search a lot, it'll be there, and you can just click on it and it'll search it again. You don't have to start all over. So I found that a really helpful thing to know about Twitter and advanced searching. I don't find Facebook that easy to search, to be honest, but it can be done. Now, we're talking about using social for reporting. So obviously this is a good way to do it, but another way is use it for crowdsourcing. So I want to introduce you, if you don't already know him, to a reporter at the Washington Post who has a lot of followers. And one of the reasons he does that, he uses Twitter as his notepad, and he uses Twitter followers as his sources. So he, for example, has been trying to figure out if Donald Trump donated the last $200,000 of his presidential salary. Can't find it. And he tells exactly what he's looking for, where he has asked this question. And he says, if you know, reply here so you can get credit, right? Update. I've contacted all the cabinet agencies. And guess what? I don't know. But it's a federal holiday, so maybe Monday. And then another tweet a bit later, I'm still trying. And then he shares his notebook, right? Here's where I've gone. He did this quite effectively during the Trump administration because his beat was covering the money. So he, for example, wanted to know how much money the federal government was spending at Donald Trump's properties, his golf clubs and hotels and so forth. And he could get a hold of some information and some documents, but often he just did the old-fashioned kind of reporting. He would call and he would check in with various things. And he would do this. He would share his little notepad. It's basically, as you can see, a page out of his notebook. And he would ask people, do you know something that I don't know? And astonishingly, people would tell him. I mean, he broke a lot of stories, and he did a lot of it because he was able to get his followers, his people, to respond to him. So again, as community radio journalists, as you begin to build this audience on social, you can use them. They can be really, really helpful to you. Now, again, verify, verify, verify. If I say that once today, I'll say it at least 3 or 4 times, because people will tell you things that aren't true, right? But it's one way to find out what people are talking about. Even if it's false, as we'll talk about in the next section, maybe it's something you want to respond to, and you need to know that, right? So it's a really useful place to be for reporting news and finding news. All right, let's talk about breaking news. Okay, so when there's big breaking news, you may find out about it on one of these media. So this is Twitter. A woman named Hannah Downey had tweeted about a fire that was already burning out of control near where she was. Current view from downtown Red Lodge. Pretty crazy. June 15 is already fire season here. And she's got, some video there. And needless to say, she starts getting responses. This is just one example. Hi, Hannah. This is an online news agency. Hope everyone's safe. Did you film this yourself? Could we use it with credit? Tell us the day and time you took it. I mean, what if she were in danger, right? What if she wasn't even able to get out of Red Lodge and this is what she's getting? Here's our content agreement. I see this all the time. And Luke and grumpy old guy down there replies and says, don't just give this footage to the money grubbing press without putting some money in your pocket. They will want it for just credit to you. Yes, they will. They made that pretty clear. They weren't going to pay anything for using this, right? They just wanted to give her credit and be able to use it. And they were not alone. There were dozens of messages just like this. Now, sometimes people will respond right away. I've seen people say, sure, use it, no problem. Just, use my name. But it can be too much. It can also be really offensive. Again, if someone is in a dangerous situation, let's say during the riots in South Africa, if you found stuff on Twitter and you wanted to get in touch with people and they were really in a dangerous situation, you come across as bloodthirsty, as a vulture. And you don't want to do that. The big news organizations are going to do that. You certainly don't want to do that, right? So what else could you do? Well, how about doing some reporting? How about that? So this is a woman named Hannah Downey, right? And we've got her Twitter handle, and we can look at her Twitter description. Here's her profile. Hannah Downey, happiest when outside. I think about these problems. I'm policy director at PERC Tweets. Oh, how about that? So we know she's based in Montana and she has a job. And then let's go look at her bio on perc.org. Oh, there it is. She's the policy director. And guess what? There's her email, right? So wouldn't it be better to try and reach her that way, to reach her directly? And maybe you could even find a phone number. You could certainly find a phone number for her organization, and call them and see if you can reach her, right? It's old-fashioned. It might take just a couple of minutes more time, but your request is not going to be buried in 100 others from larger news organizations than you, making requests in the middle of breaking news. So just something to think about. Again, something that you can do. And reporting on WhatsApp, of course, is tricky. Generally, if there's a private group, you have to be invited. So that means you have to know it exists. There are public directories of public groups, but truthfully, there's no way to know if they're useful unless somebody tells you. So that's something to think about. And when it comes to WhatsApp, it can be really useful, as I've said, because you know when a source has read your message. But for groups, it can be a little tricky. And there's a lot of misinformation circulating on WhatsApp. Now, let's talk about mistakes briefly, because we're human beings. And so we're probably going to make mistakes. Act fast. What's really cool is that you can now unsend a tweet if you act really, really fast. And that means if you've just done something silly, like I do this all the time, oops, there's a grammatical error, or there's a typo or a spelling mistake, I can recall it really quickly and fix that. There are reports this could soon be a paid feature, which would be disappointing, but I get it. That said, it's a really handy thing to be able to do. And if you've missed that option, because it's only there for a few seconds, so my advice is always proofread and certainly take a quick look after you post to make sure what you think you wrote is what you actually wrote. If you've missed that option, correct, apologize. Generally, don't delete. And that's because it looks like you're trying to cover something up, and because a lot of people capture these things. So if you've made a really big boo-boo, someone will have captured it. So Andrea Mitchell, Lord knows why she felt, she wanted to do this, but she said, Senator Ted Cruz says the impeachment trial is like Shakespeare, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. No, that's Faulkner. Oops. Does everyone recognize full of sound and fury, signifying nothing? It is definitely Shakespeare. So it takes her a little while, it takes her like an hour and a half, but finally she comes on and says, in a response to herself, I clearly studied too much American literature and not enough Macbeth. My apologies to Senator Cruz. Now, what often happens, as you can see, is that the original had 17,000 likes. The correction had 6,000 likes. That often happens. But she's done it, and she's done it forthrightly. She didn't say, oh, I made a typographical error. Oh, I was just kidding, which you see sometimes. It was just a joke, right? No, she made a mistake, and she corrected it. If you do decide to delete, always explain why and include a screenshot of the error so people don't think you're actually trying to hide it. I think we need to own our own mistakes if we expect other people to own theirs, and we certainly do. One of our roles as journalists is to hold people accountable, right? So on Facebook, make sure that if you've edited, explain why, because I hope you're aware of this. You can easily find out if a Facebook post has been edited. You just click on the three dots and it says, previous versions. And you can see how many times it's been edited and exactly what changed. Now, this can be really helpful, again, if you're trying to find an original, because it's still there. But I find it really helpful if I'm editing something to say, edited for type